I think once you can start deconstructing the work, because you can then allocate the work across a workforce which you now understand and you can, measure, you can start allocating that work where it's best suited to be delivered. And that delivery will be through a human-based workforce, and sometimes it will be through a synthetic workforce. But ultimately, if you think about it holistically in terms of what we're trying to do, I think that's a good thing, because the big winner here will be the patient.
Okay, welcome back to the Work Intelligence Lab podcast. I'm your host, Karla Fletcher, and this is where data sparks a conversation and insights take it further. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the world of Sanofi, one of the world's most influential biopharma organizations, represented in over 70 countries and 83,000 people working for them. But the context of today's conversation is a little bit more sobering than this. By 2030, it is forecast that we will be short of 10 million health workers. Workforce planning is becoming a priority for many organizations, but in healthcare and life sciences, less than 25% of leaders have visibility of what the future of the workforce is or needed to make confident decisions on talent. The impact of that is significant delays in pharmaceutical therapies, not due to science, but due to the lack of skills and workforce. So, with that, I'm going to be speaking to Jonathan Shilton from Sanofi. And Jonathan, I've done a little bit of stalking on your profile. You are going to explain your title and what you do. But one of the things that I loved and really stood out was on your status, which said, connecting the workforce dots. So please, if you don't mind, just give us a little bit about what it is you do and your title and what are those dots that you're connecting?
No, absolutely. And first of all, thank you very much for having me on and inviting me. It's a real privilege actually to be on here with you. I've followed a little bit of your earlier podcasts, and I think what you're trying to do here is really insightful and bring a wider community to this. So in relation to what I do, who I am, and connecting the workforce dots, so my name is Jonathan Shilton. I've joined Sanofi over 3 years ago. I look after what we call the External Workforce Global Program Office. The objective of the Global Program Office was to bring our external workforce closer to our P&C community and to our P&C ecosystem. The objective is to start bringing a total workforce management and strategy together so that we can start managing the entire workforce ecosystem in relation to workforce planning, but more importantly, in relation to what is going to be quite an eventful future years in the pharma industry. Exciting
as well?
Yeah, no, it's very exciting, and I'm very lucky to join Sanofi. I think you mentioned it. We are a unique organization. Everything we do is for the patient. So once your objective becomes your mission and that mission becomes a conviction, the entire organization pivots to that. And that's quite exciting.
So when I did the introduction and I spoke about some of those things where, there's a shortfall of globally 10 million workers, health workers by 2030. And we've been saying 2030 for a long time, like it's this far away thing. It's 4 years away.
Yeah.
And with the leaders in those sectors not having that visibility of what they need to plan ahead and make, impactful decisions or confident decisions, how does that resonate?
Well, I think there's a very famous saying, which is you can't improve what you can't measure. Nor can you measure what you can't see. So part of what I do and part of the objective of what we are doing with regards to the Global Program Office is to bring, first of all, visibility of our external workforce. Once you have visibility of it, we can start looking at who we have, what type of skills. When we talk about skills in a skill-based organization, we've just transformed Sanofi towards that in terms of what we called internally the skills power strategy. Again, we wanted to connect our contingent workforce to that strategy so that we could start comparing internal skills and external skills. If you know what you have, you know what you need to potentially pivot and reskill or upskill or retrain. But more importantly, you know what you're looking for potentially in the future, because there's a lot of roles which we will need, which haven't yet been created. And there's probably some that we don't know about, which again, we will have to look at and start building pipelines.
And how far in the future do you think this has given you the capacity to get sight of?
Well, I think as you build out these strategies, they incrementally get further and further futuristic, in the sense of you will start in the short to medium term to have an understanding of your own organization. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a truly, data-based driven concept of, okay, what skills do we have? Who do we have in our organization? Where are these individuals wanting to go with their own careers? Because again, that's insights that can be combined with where the organization is going. But more importantly, you're also combining market industry in terms of where the industry is transforming, where the market is going, what other players, competitors or indirect competitors are doing. And all of that combines you to, I think, a view and a vision where you start then seeing the medium to long term. And then you can start anticipating the long-term piece where it becomes quite futuristic and hypothetical, but you can start putting data points to that. And then you can start making plans. Now, they're hypothetical plans, but ultimately you can start planning.
And speaking of data, because one of the things that your CEO did long before AI became fashionable was start adopting it within the organization. And I'll leave it to you to come back to me and tell me how successful or not that was. But one of the things we know is that most organizations in healthcare and life sciences are only, they need the data hygiene, right? And only have about 25% of that, which is the topic that is less sexy, I would say, when we talk about AI. Talking about data hygiene, but that's something that you managed to achieve earlier on to find success later. And within that, I'm wondering, what was it that you uncovered in that process that surprised you?
Yeah, I think it would be true to say that, at Sanofi, we're all in with AI, but we're not all in, as the French say, n'importe comment. In the sense of we are very business case conscious in terms of how we do it. We also have embraced ethical AI in terms of within the organization. And we're applying it, I think, to real life business cases that can transform what we do for our patients. And I think ultimately that's quite empowering, just as an employee within the organization. I think the other topic which is notable is when we come to workforce, and again, in my world, the data hygiene element is quite key. Because to enable AI, you have to enable two things. You have to enable a very clear process, and to do a process, you need to have a certain degree of standardization and harmonization. And then you have to have clear data sets. Those are the two components for machine learning to be able to automate and build out strong foundations. So for me, I think what we've been doing, which is transforming our organization to be, future ready and future proof, at the same time doing the hard work in, as you call it, the unsexy side or the dark side of AI enablement, which is standardizing, harmonizing and structuring our processes so that they are, standard and global. But at the same time, we have to recognize, again, in external workforce and contingent workforce, that some countries have legislations that drive a certain degree of locality. But that doesn't stop you then having global definitions. We've done something very simple, such as define what a temporary worker is at a global level. What is a freelancer at a global level? What is a contractor? What is, a service access only worker when they come from our outsourced companies? Now that may sound very tactical and may sound actually quite naive in terms of, well, why don't you have that? But I've done enormous amounts of external benchmarking in the market, and actually a lot of our competitors and indirect competitors, when you talk about that, they go, oh, yes, that's true. In all of our countries, we talk about different languages and we talk in different terminologies. And so we've worked enormous amounts on the classification of our workforce. at a global level, and yet we keep the categorization so that it's compliant. But that's enabled us to really drive a degree in a common understanding, and thus you can then start playing around with the AI piece, which is more the conversational and the intake, and
the fun bit.
Yes, and the fun bit, which everyone loves to see, but you don't necessarily play around with the side on the other side of the coin.
So when we talk about this unsexy bit, the data hygiene element of it, what do you think it is that organizations underestimate when they're trying to achieve this? Are they skipping past certain processes with the expectations that things can be fixed, or what is it that in your experience you would see?
Thank you for the question, because it's something which is current in what we're currently doing in our transformation. Again, I think it's about what I call it foundational work. When you're trying to build a house, if your foundations are not strong, then whatever you build on top will just simply collapse over time. So I think here we're trying really to lay, the pipes, the cables to ensure that we have the foundations so that we can turn on the lights, or that you can, AI say, when you walk into the house, say, turn on the lights, and everything turns on, or that you may not even have to turn on the lights because the house knows that you've already walked in. So, that metaphor in terms of what we do with the external workforce is about, as I said, very simple, basic, strong foundations, such as, do we have a common understanding of what our workforce is globally? Mm-hmm. As organizations grow and become more and more complex, and probably decentralized or centralized, depending on their strategy, the local aspect of where the organizations will be based in the countries where they'll be based will drive a lot of the localization and the local interpretation. And it's how you marry both of those. So you have to have a global understanding. Your processes have to reflect a certain degree of standardization without, removing the local, either legal framework or specificities that enable your success at a local level. And also there's an enormous amount, and I think this is probably the one that is the most underestimated, which is change management. And
I was going to bet on that.
Yes, no, true.
Hands down.
And there are much smarter people out there who have written a lot of things on change management, but on the practical level, it's about taking people on the journey. I won't shy away from that, because I think that ultimately is where it stands, and that requires enormous amounts of investment and time. But I think because people deserve to be taken on the journey, and I think when they see that an organization is investing on taking them on the journey, you actually see the returns. And I know recently there was an article that came out saying that there wasn't necessarily a lot of returns on AI investment. But I think the article missed an important point, which was, what is the unforeseen return on investment with regards to your human capital? Yep. And I think everyone is embracing this, both on your personal phones or in your personal life in terms of a new technology. But I think everyone's trying to understand what is it in for me in terms of my work, and when I go to the office or when I work from home, how does it all impact my work life?
Yeah.
And I think as organizations underpin that and start taking people through that journey, then that is for the better.
I came across doing some research at the beginning of this year, a prediction that 85 million jobs would be cut due to AI and automation. And I looked up what that is today, now December 2025, and it's actually in fact only 14 million, right? So we have created this hype and hysteria around things that are not necessarily actually going to happen. And like you say, there are some positives, but perhaps also unforeseen as well. One of the things I was going to ask you or wanted to talk about was that we're seeing through our research, 75% of the healthcare and life sciences industry is basically saying AI is going to change how the industry works. It's going to change development. And my question is, with Sanofi, is that the same thing happening, or are you trying to differentiate in a completely different way? And will you have different or new competitors? Who do you think your future competitor will be as a result of that?
It's a very insightful question, because I think I in terms of where we stand within the external workforce program, let me answer the question through 3 points on the lens, which is, the first one is we've started referring to the contingent workforce workers and the contingent workforce as a human-based external skill set. The reason being is we all know that agents are coming. So there is a world where we won't necessarily be borrowing contingent workers off the market, be it freelancers or temporary workers. We may actually be borrowing a bot or an agent that has been effectively built and designed to be able to contain enormous amounts of knowledge and access enormous amounts of knowledge in real time, and at the same time be able to scale that accessibility across an enterprise. And I think that is the potential of what the technology offers in terms of delivering and supporting a transformation or even meeting an organization's objective. I think the second point, which is something that we are currently doing with your organization, which is how do we go from a recruitment service, at a global scale, and how do we transform so that we get from you a workforce as a service?
Yeah.
And ultimately, how do you customize our requirements as Sanofi at scale so that you can service us throughout the organization, but also throughout our geographical reach?
Yeah.
And I think finally, the point that's really important for me is the organizations may transform and may get smaller, but I don't necessarily think our breadth of workforce will get smaller. So I think our depth of workforce will get smaller, but our breadth will probably get larger.
Become more skilled and niche.
Yes. And I've started, and I think sometimes people look at me, which is slightly strange, but I started talking about, instead of talent pools, I started talking about talent mesh, right, or workforce meshing, where we are going to see in the future a decentralization of organizations, where the core workforce will be smaller, but it will probably be highly skilled and be of a greater depth in terms of knowledge and competencies and skills. But we will engage across wider organizations and partnerships because I think the technology will disrupt not just our industry, but all of the industries.
Yeah.
And so the other thing, to your point around competitors, I think our traditional competitors will transform themselves, but I think the barrier for entry will become lower. And I think we won't necessarily see new competitors, but I think we will see probably new partners, new organizations doing innovation that wasn't necessarily either foreseen. And I think that can only be good for one thing, which is the patients. I think ultimately the organization has a core mission to do everything it can for patients. And I think as we look at it, as the industry is being disrupted by AI, and it's probably one of the last industries to be disrupted by AI, after FMCG, after banking, after services. We are responding by building out the infrastructure and, again, the foundational work so that we can sustain it and be ahead of the pack.
So I think this is one of the things that you like to talk about. You're quite passionate about. What does the future of healthcare look like? Earlier diagnoses, virtual healthcare, people getting care at home, earlier breakthroughs. What else do you see the industry changing? And then how is that experience that we're having with healthcare changing your workforce planning perception or hat at the same time?
Yeah, so I think the speed of transformation and the speed of science has a direct correlation to the speed of hiring. If you want to go faster, then you need to have the workforce to enable you to go faster. And when I talk about workforce, I mean both the human workforce and now potentially the agentic or synthetic workforce. And that combination of where you put the dial, I think, will be crucial to a lot of organizational success. Ultimately, for me, what is quite key in our world is, as our organization is being merged into a lot of other industries, from wearables, applications, the ability to tailor. You can have, I read recently that people were loading up their medical records on Gen AI based applications. So there is generally an interest, I think, at an individual level to take control of your own data. And I think we live in a world now where data is becoming even more democratic for individuals because of the phones that we have, the watches that we have, the fact that we're connected, and the fact that we're going to be in a world where more and more of our objects are potentially connected, and we are connected together. We could also spend, I think, hours arguing about maybe the downsides of that.
I was going to go there, because it kind of makes us a little bit, I didn't get enough sleep, and become a bit of a hypochondriac around well, now I'm feeling unhealthy. I was having this conversation with a friend earlier. And so we're putting all this attention on all the things that the tracking is doing. And these are just, today's technology. I don't know what it's going to be like in the future. Does that have a mental wellness impact, I suppose, for us?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a professional in that field, so it would be difficult for me to answer. What I can give you is that I think there is a degree of individual responsibility. I think there's a degree of that people need to understand their data. But once they understand their data, the big question is, what do I do with it?
Yeah.
And I think in all walks of life, I think that is something that we all have to, tackle and be responsible about, and have, I think, an equilibrium, right? I think the old saying of, having, it's good to have a bit of everything stands. I think, again, in the pharma world, the workforce will, which has long been seen as supplemental, I feel, in our pharma industry, for legacy reasons, for historical reasons. Workforce was seen as an enablement of being able to effectively enact our products that go to patients. But I think as we transform, the workforce will become strategic, because it is about the brightest skills, the brightest minds to enable a lot of those discoveries and those innovations. And I think the workforce will be digitalized a lot more in terms of digital skill set, because we will have to have the ability to be nimble, deconstruct the organizations, and not in a negative way, but in the sense of, deconstructing to pivot, to rebuild, or to reconstruct, so that we can adapt to the market's dynamics, but also feel how the organizations will transform and be able to then drive, future success for the patients. And I think we're all trying to do it, and we're all trying to tackle it. I think the approach that we're doing, which is to start, okay, look, what's our foundational workforce? How do we lay the foundations for it? Is the right one, because it allows us to do the, not necessarily the most rewarding work in terms of building it all together, in terms of the foundation, but the enablement that it will allow us to do once we have access to that data and we have access to those insights, not only in terms of learning, recruitment, talent management, but also workforce planning. We will start really connecting the workforce dots, which in essence then allow our businesses to say, okay, well, what is the future work that I need to be doing? Or how do I need to do this work so that I can actually meet the objectives which are to deliver for the patients? And I think once you can start deconstructing the work, because you can then allocate the work across a workforce which you now understand and you can, measure, you can start allocating that work where it's best suited to be delivered. And that delivery will be through a human-based workforce, and sometimes it will be through a synthetic workforce. But ultimately, if you think about it holistically in terms of what we're trying to do, I think that's a good thing, because the big winner here will be the patients.
Do you see a ratio in terms of that synthetic workforce to human?
Yeah, I've been asked that question a lot, and I don't have one.
Yeah.
Because I think it's all to do with the nature of the work. And so if I look at my organization, our ratio will be different to another organization in the pharma world, and maybe it will be totally different into an organization in logistics or in banking,
agriculture.
Yeah, but I do think the key will be to understand, as you say, that balance. And I think the ability to move the dial based on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, and how quickly you can do it and how efficiently you can do it, is the success. So yes, I'm giving you a non-answer, but at the same time, I'm trying to be quite pragmatic about it.
Look, I think the reality is that everybody is in that experimental non-answer phase, and we're all coming to terms with that now, because there was a big hype and a big leap. And then when somebody went, okay, well, do you mind showing me exactly what that is? Oh, no, we're still working that out. And I think a lot of organizations have started to confess that, but are seeing those incremental successes, those incremental changes, productivity gains, et cetera, et cetera.
For me, there's three key voices in this industry of transformation, or in terms of generative AI, where we're heading. You've got the voices of the companies who are building the products. And if you actually listen to them, some of their feedback into the market can be quite stark in terms of the serious impact of the technology.
Yeah.
You then have a voice of the companies who are using that technology to then build services for companies. And their voice is to say it's not as stark as the voice of the people who are building said technology, and that this will be effectively an enablement or a power up. I think you've probably heard of the terminology about super workers and super agents. So that's the voice of the organizations who are selling you the products based on the companies who are building them, and then you have the voice of the clients who are probably trying to figure out how to integrate it into their ecosystem
and get it for cheaper.
And probably get it for cheaper, but also in terms of what is the return on investment? How does it work for me? And more importantly, how does it transform my business for, again, in our world, for patients? And I think for me, where it's quite key is the technology and the access to the technology doesn't necessarily mean, I think it offers companies a real choice of, do I buy off-the-shelf products or do I build my own?
Yep.
That meets my requirements and my needs.
Which is the same talent strategy.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And it's the same with workforce. Will you look to, externalize your recruitment? Or do you internalize your recruitment? Do you externalize your recruitment of contingent workers? Do you internalize it? Do you bring together your talent acquisition function with your contingent worker acquisition function? How does talent management connect then with all of those? And there is no one template fits all. Each organization will build it, but I think the technology allows you to become a lot more modular. And I think, to your point, in terms of the voices out there in the market, I think clients should be probably thinking, okay, let's listen to the people actually building the technology, but also listen to the people who are using that technology to provide services, because they've obviously identified a need in the market, and also do a lot of benchmarking with other clients, because I found that bringing the outside in, which is part of what we're doing here today, allows you to gain a lot of practical insights in terms of how other organizations are either failing to implement or having successes. Yeah.
And obviously, a massive opportunity for the startup community. But again, we spoke about competition. Who's your new competition? And there have been for some time in terms of technology, but this could be even faster in terms of the way they can develop and grow and build out, because they do not have the kind of governance or bureaucracy of some of our larger organizations. Have you got any thoughts on that?
I think, again, I won't feign to be an expert in the in that area of the field, but what I can tell you from a workforce perspective, and from what I've seen in having conversations with my peers, is that there is a true recognition that the speed to discovery, we are sitting on technology which can be really transformational.
Yeah.
And it can be transformational for the organizations that are invested in doing it, but it ultimately is transformational, for the patients. But I think when you look at it, it means that smaller organizations can focus on smaller molecules or specific molecules or dedicated areas of the field. And I think, it's what I was telling you about, this meshing, in terms of, I think we will see more and more startups or specialists who are there to utilize the technology to target a specific area or a specific field. And I think that's okay, because ultimately the ultimate winner is the patients. I think holistically then how the market transforms and how it all comes together is something that I think everyone's trying to tackle. But I think there is a recognition that more and more in that field, there will be more and more specialists and more agile organizations who will enter that space. The question then is, how do you partner with them? How do you bring it all to market?
I have two totally different questions, separate from each other. One is this notion of there's a statistic that we change careers every 7 years in our lifetime. What does that look like when you look at workforce planning and when you're looking at the future? How does that sit with you? What thoughts do you have about that?
Yeah, so interestingly, I come from a world where I was told you change roles every 3 years.
Yeah.
1 year to to learn the role, 1 year to do the role, and 1 year to start looking for the new role. I think with the transformation towards skills, I think with the new generations that are hitting the workforce, who are looking for something different in terms of what they want out of a career, but also in terms of what organizations they work for, in terms of what impact or social impact or economical impact they drive across society. I think there's a recognition in the market that has a huge role to play in the future workers who will be hitting the workforce. I think how you bring all of that together, for me, there's 3 key buckets. One, I think we will have to have a recognition that people may want to work for multiple companies in the future. Not necessarily doing the same thing, actually, maybe utilizing different skill sets.
Yeah.
I think people will develop different skill sets because, again, the technology will enable them to have, a degree of expertise and access to a degree of knowledge and capability, which will enable them to be able to do different things for different types of people, different types of services. So I think everyone is walking around in their pocket with some degree of...
I think there's a notion that was spoken about in one of the previous episodes with one of my colleagues about actually becoming more generalist. We are becoming more specialist, but there is the notion of becoming more of a generalist, so that you are touching across these different skill sets or able to shift and be agile and move into different roles.
I think the offering will become generalist, but I think the nature of then the specificity will become very specialist. But I think you won't necessarily go to multiple people, as you say, to get a specific skill or a specific service. I think you will go to a generalist, but what they will give you in terms of that service or that skill will be very specialized. Because I think you're right, there is a consolidation, because everyone has access to potentially the same information through the same medium. So then there's a challenge around, well, how do you differentiate the real expertise or the real added value? And I think no one has yet come to the fore in terms of how that's going to be done.
Is there any sort of, because you think a lot about the future, and yes, you got to work with numbers and data, but is there any kind of sci-fi vision that inspires you, or you have, when you think about you, just thinking of a more sort of fun side, like, my goodness, this could all completely turn into something completely different that we don't know. It could take a life form of its own.
No, there is one area which I've always been fascinated about, and again, you'll probably feel that this is a bit nerdy of me, but we talk a lot about in external workforce around borrowing skills from the market, but no one's really cracked how we borrow skills from other organizations.
Right.
Because nothing really stops us from, if we really are about trying to bring the best skill set to the best outcome, then if you think about it, the ability to connect with another organization saying, look, I've got some of these people who'd potentially be interested in coming over to you, working on this project, or we can, co-build a project team. I think that is an area where, okay, there's a lot of, competition law and there's a lot of employment law that gets in the way of all of that. But I think that's quite fascinating in the sense of nothing should stop individuals potentially collaborating on a piece of work or on a project, which sometimes they have nothing, it's not actually about them. It's more about what they can bring in their skill sets. And then so you're bringing pieces of work, again, to the most accessible people.
And it could be of value in terms of commercial value for both organizations that are using that.
Yeah, but also in terms of career development, future opportunities, retention, in terms of, how you upskill and retain your workforce in the future. I think to answer your one of your earlier questions around, the ability for people to build out their own careers and your statistic around the 7-year career, I think there's an element here which is quite interesting, which is the people will be able to collaborate through platforms.
Yeah.
And that platforms will become the new way of for individuals who have a high degree of skills to effectively collaborate in a safe way, and that there are technologies such as tokenization which can allow you to self peer the work in a safe and environment
And it's
way.
nothing new, right? It's what we do anyway. It's what we do with, I've got certain strengths in the team, other people got weaknesses. It's just broadening it outside of our own organizations. I've got an interesting question that occurred to me last night, thinking about the role that your industry plays in terms of the actual future of talent securing talent. We have a demographic that is aging in North America and EMEA. Obviously, a lot of less access to knowledge workers or skilled workers. The pool is getting smaller and smaller. We have youth in a lot of our third world countries who are in poverty, and we have an ability to upskill them and help them. And where does the health and life sciences industry play a role in things like, life longevity, so people can work longer, or healthier children to build a future-proof, healthier workforce? Those sorts of things. It's something that occurred to me, and I thought, do you think either now or potentially in the future, there is some responsibility on this industry to contribute to securing that talent and building it from a health perspective?
Yeah, I think it's I think your description of it being a philosophical question is the right one. I think there's a wider human collective responsibility from private organizations to public organizations to and to governments, right, to be able to enable collectively the workforce of tomorrow. I mean, realistically, every part of those three key actors that I've described, I think wholeheartedly want the best for humanity, without sounding too too pastiche. But I do think from a workforce perspective, something that's really insightful in terms of what you're describing is we have varying degrees of workforce who are at varying degrees of cliff edges in terms of their life cycle. And I think organizations are all scrambling to understand that data set, and they're trying to understand what's happening in these countries and where can they go in the future, or is it from a market perspective? Is it from a talent perspective? Is it from a skill perspective? And that's only three key examples that I can think of in my world. And I think organizations like yourselves have access to that data set through your networks. And I think it's how you put that data to work with regards to our workforce planning. And I know, we touched upon platforms and collaboration, but again, nothing stops us to be in a world where all of that data is, anonymized and we can access it, and we can feed our own data into it to collectively build an understanding of where, the workforce of tomorrow is and where the workforce will be, because I think it can only benefit, again, the end patient. Because if companies are able to go into locations or countries where, they can establish effectively a footprint and start operating in with a workforce that matches, again, their requirements and their needs, then it can only collectively benefit the entity.
And I think it's a little bit like you were saying, businesses collaborating, organizations, but what about countries and geographies? Looking at, EMEA, North America, Africa, South America, they're complete polar opposites in terms of those demographic challenges that they have.
Yeah. And if I may, because I think it's and I really like the question, because I think it's a really thoughtful one. But also from a workforce perspective, I think your organization, maybe your competitors or your indirect competitors also maybe have some foundational work to do.
Let's keep it here for now.
No, but I think there's an industry question, which is from an end client perspective. We're trying to build our own understanding of and our own classification and our own definitions of our workforce, for our purpose, our strategic needs. But actually, what's the market doing? What are our competitors doing? How do I compare myself to, not just from a comparative perspective, but also from a okay, what have they done that we could be doing? Or what did they not, what more importantly, were they not able to do? So that, again, we can learn from it. And I think there's a huge value in that. And I know I keep talking about data and process because ultimately that's the foundational work. But it's also the more pragmatic piece that a lot of people tend to forget or undervalue.
This organization, this podcast, the Work Intelligence Lab, is data fueled, data sourced, and it's what we do with that data. So we love data. And on that note, for the listeners, a lot of the facts or statistics I have pulled out are from our Healthcare and Life Sciences World of Work report for 2025, which you can access on our manpower.com website. Jonathan, with that and so many closing thoughts, and I think one thing that we haven't spoken about, but it just resonates, is your actual passion for the end patient and customer and what drives you. And I think that's very admirable. It's not something, I can see why people get behind you with the bigger picture of what you're kind of looking to achieve. I think we very fortunate in the workforce and staffing space are, glad to go home and say, my job is to put people to work. Well, that's what we want to do. We really want to put people to work. Any lasting thoughts from you? Anything that you want to add or leave with us?
No, well, I think first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure having this discussion with you. I think yes, the end patient piece is quite key, and I'm very lucky to be at an organisation that puts it at the heart of whatever it does. And in my small patch of the world, in terms of contingent workforce or external workforce, however you call it, the ability to connect that workforce, and I think that's probably what I would like to leave people together is if you connect the workforce, you can then start to see what it looks like. And then you can start saying, okay, does it look like something that we need to evolve, upskill, retrain, pivot to fit our organizational objectives? And I think sometimes we forget about what the makeup of our workforce can look like. And I think that's the key point, is that, you cannot measure what you can't effectively see.
Well, thank you. I'm excited for the journey. Is there anything that you are particularly excited about that you're embarking on?
We've got some really, cool pilots going with your organization, yourselves, in terms of all the things that we've been talking about, right? Accessing the data, being able to, at scale, query, workforce insights, the ability to bring in data such as payroll, such as where the skills are. We're working with you guys to be able to say, okay, we've got a piece of work to do. How does that work get deconstructed? How does then that deconstruction get allocated in terms of skills? You guys are working with us to help us then say, okay, where are those skills best placed to effectively find them, and how much potentially will they cost? And I think that's quite fascinating. And so I'm generally excited on that collaboration, because I think it's not only transformative in terms of what you guys can give us at scale, which is for our specific requirements, but I think that's also where your industry is going, and so that's quite nice to be at the forefront of that.
I think where I sit and with the insights team and with the insights knowledge that we have, the things that I am seeing come out of the true life stories in terms of hairdressers becoming project managers in different programs, and how much we are using this data to find completely untapped talent pools that we never thought of before. It really is. It's a phenomenal world to live in.
And I will bounce off, and I know we're closing off the podcast, but I think there is something to be said also around how AI will transform learning, and how it will be able to fasten and tailor to the individual in terms of upskilling and reskilling, or potentially retraining on something totally different. And I think that is also an unforeseen and undervalued opportunity, which I think a lot of organizations will start tackling very quickly, because it has the potential to be quite life-changing.
I see it as you could have an agent that teaches you as you are learning and you are going along on that journey. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, but I mean, let's take it one further, right? We were talking about career. I mean, you could technically have an agent drive your career throughout an organization. But again, to our conversation around platforms or the ability to collaborate, I mean, you could have your own agent that as it would plug into the organization that you join, that has access to that workforce information, that skill, and then it navigates you through the organization in terms of the career, and then you go to another organization and you carry with you your career, your projects, your achievements.
Your agentic twin.
Correct. And then you plug it into the next organization.
Well, that's a plug for one of our future podcasts, because we have a gentleman, author by the name of Christoph Kolb, who is publishing a book called The Cognitive King. And in there are some extremely insightful views on how that is going to be built, and how companies will also be building culture through agents. So interesting, very, very interesting future
I look forward to reading it.
Yeah. But listen, lovely to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the work we continue to do together. Co-creation is what we're about. And so let's, hopefully we've got a story to tell in a year's time, and we can come back here and share it together.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to.
Great.
Thank you.